Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anier. Now, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, Daniel Prude. The roll call of black men in the United States who've died at the hands of police continues to grow. There have been protests across several states and demands for an end to police brutality and racism. The most recent has been taking place in Rochester, New York, after video emerged of yet another black man killed in an interaction with the police. And it's feeding into the US presidential election as well, with Donald Trump making the issue of law and order a key strategy of his re-election bid. Earlier in the week, he visited Kenosha in Wisconsin, where Jacob Blake, who was shot several times in the back, remains in hospital paralyzed. And now Joe Biden, his Democratic challenger, has gone there too. Well, Bill Barnard is a senior member of the Democratic Party, and he joins me now from Oxford in the United Kingdom. Thank you, Bill, for joining us. And I expect that this has been a pretty busy period for you. Obviously, an important visit to Kenosha for Joe Biden. But interestingly, I mean, some Black Lives Matter protesters saying they'd been disappointed that the Democratic candidate hadn't come sooner and President Trump had got there first.
It's not really a serious issue, I don't think. And one of the things that you do note, despite the efforts of Trump and the Republican convention to use the violence that has erupted in some American cities as a way to win back suburban voters, particularly suburban women, has had relatively little effect on the polls. The Reuters poll that was just released, as well as others since the Republican convention, show that Joe Biden is still, by far and away, more trusted on the issue of social justice and racial justice, and in being able to quiet the tensions that exist in our country, as well as being far and away the most well-equipped to deal with the pandemic. So there's been relatively little impact upon public opinion nationally in reaction to the events in Kenosha. And I think Joe Biden showed his ability to reach out to the community, which most Americans realize has to be done. And he did so in a way that was in contrast to what Donald Trump did. He's also made very clear that he rejects absolutely and completely, and from back in June, the kind of violence and looting that has come about in some of the cities. There's no excuse for that activity that no one thinks, no one except a few, perhaps the extremists would condone it in any way. You have to reject that, but you also have to protect the right to peacefully protest and to bring before government the grievances that people have.
Well, I mean, of course, Mr. Biden's visit to Kenosha was meant to symbolize a message of unity and healing, distinct from Donald Trump's. But then, of course, in both cases, there is a political element to all of this, isn't there? I mean, how much is getting people out to vote the focus for the Democratic Party as November approaches, as a way to find solutions to America's racial justice questions?
Well, I think that's our first goal as a political party, obviously, is to win the election. And certainly that is a consideration. But anyone who knows Joe Biden and knows his career and his history knows that there's nothing out of character in what he did. It was also important that on the day after he went there, 175 American police officials endorsed his candidacy. So I think that helps as well.
But of course, I mean, there's another side to what's happening in America, isn't there, Mr. Barnard? I mean, people for whom rioting and looting are the bigger issues, and those who think that way are likely to give their vote to Donald Trump, aren't they?
I think most Americans realize that these things sometimes do generate into, especially when egged on by elements that come in from either side, and that these kinds of events do take place and do happen. But there's still no denying, I think, the impact upon the American psyche, among the American public consciousness, of the events that we've seen unfold over this past summer, and of the need to go beyond the kind of training that our police have had in the past, in fact do exactly what Biden has proposed, which is providing additional funds for community policing and for additional training, especially in de-escalation tactics.
Well, I mean, just
is in fact the most appropriate tactic to take and most likely to bring peace to our nation.
I have to apologize. We missed a bit of what you said there, the second part of what you said. But nevertheless, we got most of what you were talking about. But I mean, just explain to us. I mean, you're someone who's been a political activist, if you like, someone who's politically clued on, with America and so on. From an international perspective, there's a lot of confusion about what the Electoral College actually means, and the fact that, the popular vote doesn't seem to count, so much as do electoral votes. I mean, can you explain that to us?
Well, we are a federal state. There's not one national election. There are 51 elections in the 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And each state sets its own rules and regulations about when it's held, the hours that polls are opened, all sorts of minor regulations. It does set certain standards for the federal elections, that is for president, vice president, and for the Senate and House, but not for state governors and state legislatures and all the rest. So it is 51 different elections in a sense. The Electoral College was set up because of the rivalry between big states and small states when the country was, and each state gets representatives in the House of Representatives, roughly commensurate with its population. But it also, each state, regardless of its population, gets 2 members of the Senate, the upper house. And the Electoral College is based upon those 2 factors. You take the number of members of the House of Representatives that a state has, add 2 for the senators, and that's the total number of electoral votes that you get. Well, that does create disparities. The most extreme are between California and Wyoming. California has 53 members of the House, and it gets 2 senators, it gets 55 electoral votes, but it has 37 million people. That means that each of its electors, in effect, represent 670,000 voters. In Wyoming, the smallest of the states, even smaller than the District of Columbia, there are only 563,000 people, smaller than the town from which I come, and they get 1 member for the House, 1 electoral vote for the House member, and 2 for the Senate, which means they get 3. Well, that means that each elector from Wyoming represents only 190,000 people, where the ones from California represent 670, 80,000. So there is a disparity there, and it's grown over the years. That's one of the reasons why some people have called of the Electoral College, which seems unlikely because it would have to be done by constitutional amendment, and the small states are not going to vote for that. There have been other proposals to reform it, which we can discuss if you want, over the years, both in the past and most recently. But the system does mean that occasionally, and increasingly when you have close elections, as we've had over the last 4 cycles, that you can get an instance, as happened in the year 2000 and in Donald Trump's election in 2016, where the person who gets the most popular votes in fact loses the Electoral College.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing to get our heads around, given that we didn't sort of grow up in America, and it's a little bit odd. But I mean, the fact is that, from what I understand, that system that you're talking about seems to favor the Republicans over the Democrats. Is that right? Is that something that's seasonal, that it changes, or is it is that like something that is pretty much established?
It probably gives the Republicans a slight advantage because in many of the smaller states, especially the rural states, smaller in population, not in acreage, but in population, many of the smaller states, the rural states with small populations, tend to be Republican. So in one sense, it does. On the other hand, there have been arguments. It's winner take all. When the Democrats hold a margin in California and New York, they get a tremendous cache of voters. So I think there are swings and roundabouts, quite frankly, on the Electoral College. But as I say, there are plans or proposals to reform it in a way that would prevent presidents from being elected. One is that you would just simply give the person who gets the largest popular vote, 100 extra electoral votes. That too would require a constitutional amendment. It would be very hard to get put through. There's another proposal that's out and being acted upon right now. Any number of states have passed laws, almost effective. They passed laws which would cast their electoral votes for whoever gets the popular vote in the nation, regardless of the way their state voted. That's a little dicey because you know that would be challenged in court, and we don't know exactly how that would turn out. But nonetheless, that is a proposal that's been made to avoid this problem of having someone who gets the majority of the vote fail to get a majority of the electoral vote.
And just to warn you, Mr. Barnard, you may time out just for a second, but we would, you would sort of bring you back in. But I mean, has Joe Biden actually said it? Okay, there we are. He's timed out, just as I was talking about it. But he hopefully we will be able to get him back for a few minutes to go. But obviously, what I was going to ask him was how Joe Biden is planning to address this issue of reform that he was talking about, Mr. Barnard was talking about. And interestingly, Mr. Biden, whilst he was in Kenosha, one of the things that activists wanted him to do is to pledge that he will implement something called the Breathe Act, which calls for, in effect, defunding of the police. I mean, moving funds from the criminal justice system in the United States into other areas of social policy. I mean, that's something that Joe Biden has said he's absolutely not in favor of. So I'm just wondering whether that's going to mean that the Black Lives Matter activists who support at the moment Mr. Biden, what their reaction will be to that. And thank you for coming back to us, Mr. Barnard. I was just talking about this Breathe Act, which appears to be a big issue for Black Lives Matter activists. They want it to be implemented. It's about defunding the police, moving funds from the criminal justice system into other areas of social policy. But that's something that Joe Biden has said he's absolutely not in favor of.
Favor of defunding the police in the sense that that's sometimes used by Republicans when they state it, which means to cut police budgets willy-nilly. What he has said that he's in favor of is additional funds for more community policing and additional funds for training, especially in de-escalation techniques. So he's opposed to defunding in the way it's commonly used. He's not necessarily, nor are many Democrats and others for that matter, responsible people, not opposed to looking at police budgets to see if they can be molded in such a way as to more effectively meet the needs of the American public, and especially in the bigger cities.
Now, Mr. Barnard, we've got about a minute or less left for this interview, and thank you very much indeed for your patience. Of course, the wider context to all of this is the election in November, isn't it? I mean, the former vice president, has emphasized that he's offering empathy and healing. I mean, is that enough? Because surely what would be enough is his winning the election.
Well, absolutely, and that's not all that he's offering. Yes, that is what is at the forefront right now because of the events over the summer. Those will tend to die away, I suspect, after Labor Day as we get into September and October. But if you look at the platform that the Democrats adopted and that Joe Biden is running on, whether you're talking about health care for the American people, universal health care, whether you're talking about child care, whether you're talking about dealing with the problem of college debt, whether you're talking about the climate crisis, or whether you're talking about our relationship with our allies, as well as our adversaries, and as well as our orientation towards Europe and China. Those are all there and they can be seen. The Republicans didn't even adopt.
Okay, Bill, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I want to thank you very much indeed for joining us. Bill Barnard is a senior member of the U.S. Democratic Party. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, including we'll speak to a political strategist and member of the Republican Party. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyagolu. So 2 months out from the US presidential election, a small city in Wisconsin has become the focus of the campaign, at least this week. First, President Trump arrived in Kenosha to deplore what he said had been an assault on law enforcement in the wake of the protests against the police shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake, in the back. Well, on Thursday, it was the turn of his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden. Given the president is trying to make the election into a referendum on law and order, and given that there are also plenty of people saying that the criminal justice system is skewed against racial justice, what are the opportunities and potential pitfalls for both candidates? Well, for his assessment of the president's visit to Kenosha, I'm joined now from Richmond, Virginia, by Errol Markoch, who, among other things, is a political strategist and media spokesman for the Republicans. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope you can hear me there. Okay, you can hear me, I take it. Okay, he doesn't look like, okay. He can't hear me. Can you hear me? I hope the sound, the sort of the audio system is all turned up. Can you hear me there? Okay. Thank you for joining us. How has President Trump reacted to his rival Joe Biden's visit to Kenosha? I understand it didn't take him long to fire back.
So sorry, I cannot hear the question.
Okay, well, let's try and fiddle with the knobs here a bit and see whether we can get Mr. Markoch back on. He does not appear to have heard me, which of course is rather troubling, but that's the nature of the business, especially when you're dealing with the internet. I mean, it happens not just to us, but to virtually every single broadcast organization today, everyone limited by the coronavirus pandemic, and the fact that we now have to use the internet when under normal circumstances would use a proper fully fledged studio with satellite uplinks and downlinks and all the rest of it. But we're hoping to have a chat with Mr. Errol Markoch, who we've talked to before, about the Republican side to the American election story. President Trump, of course, going to Kenosha in Wisconsin and talking to law enforcement, standing shoulder to shoulder with them, as opposed to his challenger in the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, who chose to stand, as they put it, with the people of Kenosha. And Mr. Markoch, thank you very much indeed for rejoining us. I understand you can hear me now. How has President Trump reacted to his rival Joe Biden's visit to Kenosha? I mean, it didn't take Mr. Trump long to fire back, did it?
No, it didn't. And it was front and center about how serious Donald Trump had taken the situation in Kenosha. When you look at the Democratic Party that my prior colleague was talking about, they simply had polled that it wouldn't be favorable to actually go out and condemn looting, rioting, murder, destruction of taxpayer property. Now, when Biden and Trump both visited Kenosha, this is 100,000 people, right? Southwestern Wisconsin. There's a backdrop of is it systemic racism? Is it over policing? But by the end of the week, these two visits really hammered down what each convention was about. Trump's visit to Kenosha was notable because he had actual political and policy goal. He was clearly concerned with the widespread looting, and and the criticism that it was ludicrous for a incumbent president to point about the chaos going on his watch. He was able to show as a hairbringer of what the Democrat Party and what Joe Biden's America. You have to keep in mind that they're trying to spin this narrative that this is happening under Trump's watch. There isn't a single Republican out there burning or looting or anything. Only Republicans out there are trying to protect private property. This is a left-wing coordinated assault, and it's when Joe Biden saw the polling numbers going over. Keep in mind, Kenosha was a state that hadn't or a county that hadn't gone Republican in almost 40 years, and it's a very small margin. So when Donald Trump showed up and he stood next to businesses that had been 109 years in the making. A patriotic, hardworking, diverse community of diversity of ideas, diversity of immigrants from different places and diasporas. The shootings and the police situation is certainly something that was addressed when Joe Biden went and made a phone call to Jacob Blake, who happened to be in commission of a violation of a restraining order for a sexual assault charge that he was facing, had put officers in headlock and all that, and extrapolated to a terrible situation where he lost his life when his father, who's got known anti-Semitic posts on a verifiable anti-Christian, anti-white, using slurs on white people, goes out there and Joe Biden puts him on a pedestal. Meanwhile, a white man killed a black cop in Missouri yesterday, and there wasn't a peep about it. So Donald Trump didn't go there to support PC malcontents and disaffected Marxist agitators. He went there to support the good people of Wisconsin, who are just as important as the people of California or any American, whether or not they vote for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump understands that these swing states are so important. Hillary Clinton didn't go to Michigan, and Joe Biden's still not going to go into Michigan. Their strategy is completely devoid of decency, and also it shows to the duplicitous nature of Joe Biden, who would go in there and after polling, not on his own volition, not because he was a decent person, but after his handlers, the people who are putting this Weekend and Bernie's candidate up for grabs. So we saw, the U.S. Republic wanting to defend and redirect maybe the miscommunication and show that this isn't a systemically racist country. This is a country that has a massive political problem, has massive unrest in the streets, and Donald Trump was the only candidate who showed up there and backed up his convention party lines to try to get that across to the American people. And you're seeing the polls starting to turn in his favor.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've made a number of points there. And one of them, of course, which I have to sort of come in, is the suggestion that it's only the sort of left-wing people who are out on the streets protesting. I mean, there have been right-wing protesters as well. There have been clashes between the two sides. But, I mean, at the rally Mr. Trump held on Thursday in Pennsylvania yesterday, he accused Joe Biden of siding with what the president called homegrown terrorism. I mean, is that really the way he and the Republican Party see the Black Lives Matter protests? You don't see any justification at all in what they're saying?
Entendre. It's a trap. It's a communist trap, as though anybody would be against Black lives. I have Black people in my family. Black Lives Matter doesn't represent Black lives. Black Lives Matter is a political Marxist organization in the United States that raised tens and tens of millions of dollars through Act Blue to funnel into Joe Biden's campaign, which all of a sudden, raised $345 million. We have never been against Black lives. What we have been against is the mischaracterization of Donald Trump and how he's been out there. So he's been standing for Black Americans. He's been standing for the growing middle class, the lowest Black unemployment in history, the nonstop funding of historically Black colleges, which builds generational wealth in the Black community, which is, I went to UC Berkeley. The number one part of our undergrad sociology thing is that lack of generational wealth in families and homes and first-time college people. So a lot of people talk the talk, but Donald Trump walked the walk. And we're looking at the fact that if the Democrat Party was to lose 15% of Black female vote, they wouldn't get elected in the next century. And people are starting to leave that one-track mind. There's conservatives, there's independents, there's libertarians, there's anarchists, and you know what? They're from all colors. And the Democrat Party has taken for too long for granted the African-American vote. And that is a much more diverse community, and that is something that Donald Trump is speaking to. This law and order message speaks to the Black community especially. They don't want, you go down into some of those neighborhoods and you ask people, do you want to defund the police? Not here. That's the only thing keeping them away. But he also has to look at the bigger picture where you have illegal drug money that's really funding this. So you need.
Okay. Well, Errol, I have to say, again, it's not really fair to the other side because we try to balance things here. I'm surprised that you say that because, if Mr. Trump's way of showing his support for the Black community is not speaking to Jacob Blake or visiting any member of the family or apparently empathizing with any of them, then that's an interesting way to put it. But Errol Morkach, thank you very much indeed. You are a political strategist and media spokesman for the Republicans. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, London, and the United States, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.